The day my daughter signed the petition to take me to court, she said, "You should retire, Dad. The world has no place for your kind of justice anymore." That day, I didn't react. I just looked at her and smiled. 30 years as a judge, I had seen betrayers cry and the innocent smile, but I never imagined that one day my own flesh and blood would stand before a court to declare me legally incompetent. And then, in the very courtroom where I had once presided over hundreds of cases, I, Harold Grayson, sat again, this time as the defendant. They thought I was old, frail, forgetful, but they forgot one thing. I was the man who had written verdicts that made liars bow their heads. And that morning, when Judge Preston Ellis, my former student, read the name Harold Grayson, the entire courtroom fell silent. No one spoke. No one dared laugh, because justice, at last, had found its voice. If you have ever been looked down upon by your own kin, pushed out of your own life because they believed your time had passed, stay until the end, because I will show you that silence is not defeat. It is how justice prepares for its strongest return. Follow, so you won't miss true stories about justice, dignity, and silent revenge. And if you believe integrity never goes out of style, leave a small dot in the comments, so I'll know that somewhere out there are still people like me. People who believe justice never dies. It only sleeps, waiting for a heart brave enough to wake it. I arrived at court 15 minutes early, Boston's morning was hazy like smoke. The wind from the Charles River passed through the birches on the steps, carrying the salt of the bay and the lingering scent of coffee from a street cart. In my hand I held a dark wool cap, not to wear, but to hide the faint tremor in my fingers. My moss-green sweater was frayed at the collar, my boots still dusted with sea salt from Rockport. Passers-by glanced and turned away. They saw only a tired old man attending a guardianship hearing, another old man from Rockport, dragged to court by his own children. None of them knew I had once sat behind that wooden bench, in a black robe, reading verdicts in a voice that commanded silence. Courtroom 3 was small. The oak was polished until the lights reflected off the tables. The air smelled of paper, ink, and floors scrubbed with lemon ammonia, a scent half familiar, half clinical. People rarely realize that justice has the faint taste of chemicals. I stopped midway down the aisle. The plaintiff's table on the right was already occupied. Victoria, my daughter, wore a gray Brooks Brothers suit, a gold watch on her wrist, the one I gave her the day she graduated from Harvard Law. Beside her was Evan, her husband, a man who had once looked at me with reverence when asking for her hand, now wearing a crimson silk tie, a stiff collar, and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. I saw them whisper, then laugh quietly. Only the two of them knew the joke, but the whole room could feel it. A young clerk with blonde hair tied back approached. "Sir, are you the respondent for the case 25-1097? "I'm Harold Grayson," she smiled politely. "There's a medical examiner attending today. I can seat you near them, just in case. You need assistance." A few heads turned. A faint giggle pricked the air like a needle. I nodded calmly. "That won't be necessary. I can sit myself." She persisted, still courteous. "Of course, sir, it's just... At your age, hearings can run long. I wouldn't want you to tire." "Thank you. I've sat through sessions far longer than this." She blinked, puzzled, then marked her clipboard. The phrase, "old man from Rockport," that Victoria had just whispered, echoed in my mind. It wasn't about my clothes or where I came from. It was a statement. You no longer belong in this world. I sat at the defendant's table, back straight, hands on my knees. The right one was still calloused, a small scar from the day I brushed the iron gate of the federal courthouse after delivering my final judgment. Those cracks never healed, just like the principles I lived and died by. In front, light from the tall window fell directly on the plaintiff's table. In that light, Victoria tilted her head, radiant and a stranger. Evan leaned down, arranging files, placing a Mont Blanc pen on the table, and murmured just loud enough for me to hear, "Make sure you sign in the right place. Paperwork's tricky these days." His tone carried the smug pity of a younger man who thought himself clever. Victoria smiled faintly without looking up. She said, "If anything's unclear, Dad, I can explain it again, in simpler words." I heard a few stifled laughs. In 40 years of work, I knew that sound best. The sound of an entire room quietly agreeing with an insult. A young bailiff stood and called out, "All rise!" The rear doors opened. Judge Preston Ellis entered, tall, straight-backed, his hair streaked with gray. His black robe rippled lightly with each step. I looked at him, and he didn't look back. 25 years ago, that same law student had knelt before my desk, crying after taking a bribe for the first time. I had saved his career. Now he held the gavel. The courtroom stood. So did I. The clerk began to read, her voice clear and measured. Case number 25-1097. Petition for guardianship. Petitioner Victoria. Grayson Hale versus Respondent Harold Grayson. Her tone was steady, detached, and professional. I could hear Victoria inhale deeply. Evan placed his hand on her shoulder, a small, possessive gesture. Preston opened the case file and slid on his glasses. His voice carried through the room with the steady rhythm of an old typewriter. Petitioner alleges respondent, male, 71 years old, exhibits diminished capacity to manage an estate valued at approximately $1.2 million, including a Cambridge townhouse and a diversified trust portfolio. I heard every number clearly, each one cut like a blade, every digit a measure of dignity being appraised. Then came a brief pause in Preston's breath. I looked up. He turned a page, froze, his hand suspended midair, his index finger resting on the blank space after the word respondent. His breathing shifted. When he finally raised his head, his eyes met mine. In that instant, the entire room changed weight. The laughter vanished. The rustling stopped. Preston removed his glasses and said slowly, "My God, Harold Grayson?" His words rolled through the oak panels and marble columns like a marble striking stone. The clerk dropped her pen. Victoria's head snapped around, her face twitching. Evan's brows lifted. The courtroom fell utterly silent. I didn't answer. I remained still, one hand resting on my cap, eyes forward. Preston stared at me as if he had just opened a door to an old room he used to know. He stood, exhaled, and spoke again, softly but firmly. "The court recognizes former Judge Harold Grayson." That line wasn't part of the procedure, but the moment it left his lips, whispers rippled through the courtroom like static. Victoria flushed crimson. She forced a strained smile. "Your Honor, I don't think that's—" Preston cut her off, calm again. "It's all right, Counselor. Proceed." He spoke, but his eyes never left me. In them I saw both gratitude and unease. I knew that look. He was weighing law against memory, duty against an old debt of conscience. The clerk adjusted her papers, now looking at me differently, not with pity, but hesitation. The few who had laughed earlier bowed their heads. Evan lowered his gaze, hiding the tremor in his hand. Victoria straightened, drew a long breath, but when she spoke again, her voice cracked. "Your Honor, we only ask the court to view my father's condition with compassion. He is not as clear-minded as he once was." A long pause followed. Preston didn't take notes. He only nodded slowly, as though listening to something far away. I looked at my daughter. I'd seen those same eyes when she was 7, defending me on the playground because another child had called me cold. Now those eyes were colder still, carved from glass. I turned to the clerk. "Excuse me," I said. "Could I have a glass of water?" She hurried over and set it before me. I spoke softly, just loud enough for the nearest to hear. "Thank you. The court still remembers the manners I once taught." She froze, then smiled awkwardly. A few people lowered their heads. No one dared breathe too loudly. Preston laid down his file. His voice came low but steady. "The court will take a 5-minute recess before proceeding." The gavel struck once, just once, but the sound cracked through my chest like thunder. The room began to stir again. Chairs sliding, whispers, footsteps. Rose bowed slightly and turned to leave. No one stopped me. No one dared. Outside, the hallway stretched like a tunnel. Light filtered through the frosted glass, casting lines across the old wall that looked like the wrinkles on my own face. I leaned on the railing and drew a deep breath. In the pocket of my sweater was a small USB drive, the evidence of what I had heard in Boston 3 months earlier. My fingers brushed against it, cold, solid, real. They thought I was weak. They thought I came here only to defend myself. But justice has never stood with those who shout. It stands with those who wait. I looked back at the closed courtroom door. Inside, they were still murmuring. I knew that from the moment Ellis spoke my name, everything had shifted. No threats, no shouting, just a name dropped at the perfect time. And this morning in Boston, that name had finally fallen exactly where it needed to. 3 months earlier, Rockport was covered in a silvery gray haze like sea ash. I had just brewed a pot of coffee when the phone rang. On the screen, the name Victoria appeared, my daughter's name, accompanied by an old photo. The two of us at her graduation, my hand on her shoulder, my smile in that photo belonging to someone I no longer recognized. I answered. Her voice no longer carried the softness of the girl who used to ask, "Are you tired, Dad?" It came clipped, businesslike, as if she were reading a contract clause. "Dad, I have bad news. Uncle Charles passed last night. His heart stopped suddenly. The funeral will be on Thursday in Cambridge. Evan and I have arranged everything." I froze, my fingers tight around the cup handle. I knew Charles had heart issues, but I needed to believe, he still had years left. Not from denial, but from necessity. Charles, Marilyn's brother, was the last family member who still spoke to me without a lawyer in between. "Dad, the Charles Grayson Research Trust needs a new supervisor. Evan already spoke to the law office. They'll need you to come sign the transfer of management, just for convenience." I stayed silent. The coffee cooled. I recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone who had learned to negotiate better than to grieve. "Have you read the will?" I asked. "Yes. Uncle left most of his assets to the research trust, but you're the main trustee. Evan thought it would be easier if you delegated authority so we could handle things. We're family, after all." Family. The word left her lips like vapor, but landed cold as stone. I agreed, not because I trusted them, but because I wanted to hear the rest. "I'll be in Boston Thursday." The funeral took place in a small chapel in Cambridge. Charles lay still, kind-faced under dim light, his hands clasped around the old leather notebook he never went anywhere without. I stood quietly, hollow and conflicted. Nearby, Victoria cried, appropriately, not excessively. Evan kept a steady hand on her shoulder, occasionally shaking hands, murmuring practiced condolences. "Thank you for coming. We'll continue his work." I looked at him, and for a fleeting moment I caught his glance, calculating, not mocking. I had seen that same look in the courtroom, the look of a man who already knew the verdict, but still played the victim. That evening they invited me to stay at their Beacon Hill townhouse, a 3-story brick home with white-trimmed windows. The air perfumed with lavender from a diffuser. Everything was spotless, bright and impersonal. Victoria poured me a cup of tea. "You'll sign tomorrow, Dad. I've arranged for the lawyer to come at 10. "What papers?" "Power of attorney. Just a formality. You'll still be the trustee in name." I nodded but said nothing. At my age, a father's silence can be an experiment. I wanted to see how far they'd dare to go. That night, the downstairs lights were still on when I turned in bed. I heard voices drifting up from the living room. Through the cracked door, a narrow beam of light painted the hallway wall. 2 shadows sat near the bar. Evan's voice was firm, confident, laced with wine. "I'm still a bit worried. What if he doesn't sign tomorrow?" My body went still, every breath measured. I slipped my phone from my pocket and opened the recorder. an old habit from the bench, preserving evidence or half-finished words from witnesses. The screen lit up, recording. Evan continued, "If he signs tomorrow, great. If not, we move to Plan B." Victoria's voice trembled slightly. "Are you sure? He used to be a judge. He knows the law." "I've thought of that," Evan said, pouring more wine. "If he hesitates, we have the medical report and the witness ready. Dr. Lorne already signed off. The old man lives alone in Rockport. Everyone knows that. You just file for guardianship. Claim you're worried about his health. The court will approve it within 2 weeks. Once the court declares him incompetent, the trust becomes ours. Your father can't handle assets that large anymore. He's outdated, arrogant. You know that." A faint clink of wine poured, then a soft laugh. Victoria's voice dropped. "Are you sure? He knows a lot of the law. If he pushes back, the press—" "It's fine," Evan cut in smoothly. "We've got the medical report. I've arranged for a capacity evaluation. The entire review board will sign. An old man living alone in Rockport, clinging to the past. Once they hear that, they'll believe the rest." My knees went cold. In 30 years on the bench, I'd heard every kind of lie, but never one from my own blood. No authority can save a heart betrayed by its own family. Victoria asked, "And the trust? How will you move it?" "Simple," Evan said. "Once the court rules, I'll be the legal guardian. I can invest, restructure, and diversify. Within a year, no one will even remember where the money came from. And my father? He'll have a monthly allowance, enough to keep him quiet in Rockport." His laugh was soft, metallic, like glass being scratched. I couldn't listen further. I stared at the ceiling, where the light stretched across the plaster in a narrow line. In that line of light, I saw my reflection in a framed photo on the wall, an old face fading under the glow. People say time weakens you. It doesn't. Betrayal does. I went back to my room and shut the door gently. The click of the lock sounded like the closing of a lifetime of trust. I placed my phone on the desk, watching the red dot blink, recording, storing every word, every breath. Guardian, trust, incompetent, allowance. Words I had signed 100 times, now turned into blades. I sat on the bed, opened my notebook, and wrote my first line since retirement. February 5th. My daughter and her husband are building a case to have me declared incompetent. I paused, then added, "Silence today will preserve justice tomorrow." I uploaded the file to the cloud. 2 backups, auto-sync enabled. Even if they wiped my phone, the truth would live on. Caution wasn't a habit. It was instinct. Around midnight, rain began to fall. The drops against the Beacon Hill roof sounded like a gavel from long ago. Slow, steady, and merciless. I watched the screen fade to black, the red light gone, only a faint blue reflection left in my eyes. I thought of Charles, the brother-in-law who'd believed knowledge could save the world. If he knew his estate was being twisted into a weapon of betrayal, he'd probably sigh the way he used to. Harold, justice always asks someone to suffer first. I exhaled, feeling the night sea of Rockport rising inside my chest. It wasn't anger anymore, just cold. So cold that even sound turned transparent. At dawn, I left Beacon Hill before they woke. No note, no goodbye. I drove back to Rockport, window cracked open, sea wind slapping my face. The phone buzzed in my pocket. Victoria's text. "Dad, I sent the papers through the lawyer. Please sign when you can." I turned off the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The radio crackled weakly, playing adagio for strings. The same piece I used to hear in court. The coastal road stretched ahead, sky collapsing into silver water. I thought of my oath, to uphold honor and justice at any cost. I once believed honor couldn't be stolen. I was wrong. They can steal it by making others believe you've lost your mind. My grip tightened on the wheel. Rockport appeared in the distance, the lighthouse pale against the fog. I knew I was heading toward another kind of courtroom. No jury, no cameras, just a father, a daughter, and the truth twisted into lies. The only question in my mind as I turned down the coastal road was this: how does a man who once held the gavel find the sound of justice again when it's his own child who's filed the motion? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing for certain. That red dot had captured everything, and from that moment on, justice was no longer a courtroom. It was a plan. I sat on the weathered porch and watched the peculiar, late afternoon light that belongs to Rockport, alone, neither gold nor silver, the residue of the sea after a long day, the few minutes between dusk and night. Waves slapped the rocks below the pier, gulls cried once and drifted off, and my coffee cooled beside me until only bitterness clung to the tongue. 35 years on the bench taught me to hear every kind of voice, sworn oaths, practiced tears, speeches drafted like campaign addresses. But the voice that has haunted me most is always my own, the one I used to speak from that wooden bench, when I pronounced, "This judgment, while not pleasant for anyone, restores truth for all." Truth, a thing people cannot abide when it no longer serves them. I close my eyes and let the wind through the slats carry back the faces of old cases. Wintersun, 1992. An envelope slipped to my door the night before, sentencing unaddressed, with a single line in a hand I did not know. For your comfort and your family's. $200,000 inside. I fed it to the hearth and sent the man to 15 years. Lombard, 1998. A pharmaceutical firm offered me a promotion if I bent the law. I refused. The justice minister called me stubborn. The press called me obstinate. I called it what it was, a choice to keep a mirror that I could still look into. Integrity's cost is not only loneliness, it is the realization that applause will never come. I rose from the porch into the small living room, where faded photographs leaned on the walls. Marilyn's frame rested on the table. Her kind smile, the soft curl of her hair, those gray eyes like a New England autumn. She left me 5 years ago. I still remember the machine's steady beeps, and the moment they stopped, and how cold her hand grew beneath mine. "Harold," she used to say, "justice matters, but the hand that holds the gavel needs a heart." I smiled then and smile now at the truth of it, though I have always done one thing best: keep the gavel out of corrupt hands. After Maryland, Boston felt too large, too loud, so I sold the house, came to Rockport, and learned to trade headlines for the honest sound of surf. Once, a clerk named Preston Ellis came to my chambers with a yellow envelope and a shaking hand. He had been offered a bribe. I told him, "If you open that envelope, it opens you." He wept. I paid his bill and told him to remember the mistake, not the favor. He confessed to the bar. The lawyer who offered the envelope lost his license. Preston's career survived. So did his conscience. The wind picked up. The lighthouse blinked its slow, indifferent sequence, and I walked down to the waterline where night was already gathering. I thought of Evan's cool calculation of Victoria's clipped concern that had the warmth of a practiced script. "For Dad's sake," she said, as if pity were a legal instrument. The betrayal that bet deepest was not theft of money or office, but of language and trust. It was wrapped in family, so it hurt differently. In my pocket, I had her letter, the one Marilyn wrote months before she died. "If ever they make you doubt yourself, remember, justice is not in the court, but in how you rise." I read it until the ink blurred with salt. Back at the porch, the recorder's red dot was still dark. Earlier, I had listened again to the clip of Evan's voice, clinical and composed. "If he won't sign, we'll petition the court for incompetence." The words did not surprise me. Lawyers can dress violence in forms that look like care. A thought came not of denial, but of fact. Perhaps they were right about age. My bones are older. The fingers on this hand do not move with the same certainty. But age built from memory and discipline is not the same as being hollowed out by deceit. I let the sea wash the noise from my head and felt something else, steadier, Rise, a plan born of patience. I had spent 35 years reading judgments, doling out sentences, weighing mercy and consequence. Now I understand that a verdict could start at home. The record in my pocket, saved to cloud, redundantly backed up, meant the truth would not disappear if their lawyers tried to make it so. Justice, I have learned, seldom roars. It waits, patient as tide turn, and then arrives with the quiet force of inevitability. Tonight the gulls called once more, and the light slid under the horizon. I sat with my coffee in the sea and a memory of Marilyn's hand, and I felt the old resolve return, to stand straight, to keep the gavel clean, and to let the work of a lifetime be the proof against those who would rewrite it for themselves. Morning in Rockport carried that same gray clarity the sea leaves behind. I was making coffee when I heard a car stop at the gate. A woman stepped out, a gray coat, a worn leather file bag in hand. It took me a moment to recognize her. Margaret Foley, former investigator with the district attorney's office, my colleague for 10 years at the Suffolk courthouse. "You're hard to find, Harold," she said with that sea-roughened voice. I called a few times, no answer, so I drove 3 hours down here. I invited her in. The kitchen still smelled of salt and damp wood. She poured herself coffee, opened her bag, and laid a thick folder on the table. "Do you remember the name Evan Hale?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "My son-in-law. And also the man once under investigation in Hale Properties, 2015, real estate fraud." My brow tightened. She pulled several sheets from a plastic sleeve. Case was closed for lack of witness testimony, but I found the original notarized copy. Kenneth Barlow, the company's chief engineer, vanished after receiving $75,000 cash from Evan's secondary account. I have the transfer slip, the bank certification, and the notary seal. She paused, locking eyes with me. "And, Harold, there's something else. A recording." From her coat pocket, she drew a small USB drive. Someone from the courthouse called me, didn't want their name known, sent me this in a statement, said their conscience couldn't take it anymore. I verified the metadata, timestamp, phone number, voice analysis. It's Victoria. She offers $75,000 in cash for a statement, claiming you often forget dates. I've also got scans of the related bank stamp and receipt tied to the Hale 2015 file. Everything aligns. You're not alone, Harold. We can fight back. I couldn't speak. Even breathing felt heavy as seawater. Margaret opened her laptop and pressed play. Victoria's voice came through, steady, low, unmistakable. "I just need you to confirm my father's memory slips sometimes, that's all. $75,000 once the court approves." I closed my eyes. Every syllable cracked something sacred. Margaret shut the laptop and said quietly, "You're not alone. I've got originals, timestamps, verified bank records, all legitimate. We can build a case." I looked at her, this face that had stood beside me through so many trials, as principled and unafraid as ever. "You kept all this for me?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Not for you, for justice. But I figured you'd need it." The wind outside pressed against the window pane, sunlight slanting through to strike the folder's label. E. Hale, 2015. I inhaled, feeling a weight finally lift after weeks of suffocating silence. "Margaret," I said, "I once told you, justice doesn't need noise, only the right witness. Thank you for arriving at the right moment." She rose, buttoned her coat, and said, "Don't thank me. Just be ready." Her car disappeared down the drive, leaving dust suspended in the morning light. I stood there, holding the folder. For the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. I felt order returning. On the table, the USB lay beside my cold cup of coffee. I set a note beside it. Evidence doesn't save people. People save justice. Outside, the wind had changed. The sea still roared, but now it carried something new. Hope. 3 days after Margaret left Rockport, I received a message from Victoria. Dad, dinner at Beacon Hill this Friday night. Just family. I didn't reply. I knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a rehearsal. That night, I went anyway, unannounced. I wanted to see how they prepared when they believed their victims still trusted them. The USB Margaret had left sat heavy in my coat pocket, like an unspoken verdict. I never imagined dinner could resemble a courtroom. But that night, at Beacon Hill, under white linen and crystal chandeliers, I realized justice can also be served cold. Victoria greeted me at the door, red lips, hair pinned high, wearing the pearl necklace I once gave her mother. Her smile was flawless, her eyes calculating. Dad, she said softly, it's just family. No lawyers, no papers. Let's speak honestly. Evan was in the kitchen, apron on, pouring red wine. Judge, he said with a smirk, Rockport treating you well? Quiet as a cemetery, I answered. The dining room gleamed. Glass walls, polished silverware, Bordeaux 2002 uncorked. Every detail perfect, painfully staged. Dinner began with mushroom soup, then buttered salmon. Evan spoke about investments. Victoria nodded, gauging my reactions. I smiled faintly, phone recording in my pocket. When the main course arrived, she set her glass down and began, voice sweet enough to sting. Dad, it's time you let people who know how to make money handle Uncle Charles's fund. I looked up. People who know how to make money? Yes, she said. Evan can triple it. You've done enough. It's our turn now. I turned the glass slowly. You're talking about money, not legacy. Money is legacy, she replied without hesitation. Your time was different. Nobody lives on honor anymore. People live on results. Evan chuckled. Justice doesn't pay bills, does it, sir? The sentence hit the table like a knife into wood. I stared at him. And greed does? Depends who defines it, he said, tapping his glass. Justice is when the money's in the right hands. Ours. Victoria cut in, trying to soften the tension. Dad, don't misunderstand. I just want you to rest. Power of attorney is just a formality. Rest? I said. You mean watching someone use Charles's trust to build a second penthouse? Her tone sharpened. That's unfair. Fairness, I murmured, is the last thing anyone here wants to look at. The clock ticked like an old gavel. Victoria's eyes glistened, not with feeling, but with pride. You always think you're right, she said. You know law, not the world. You think people want justice, but they only want opportunity? You don't understand why we had to go this far? Because you thought I was weak, I said. And because you forgot, justice doesn't need belief to exist. Evan laughed, brittle as glass. Your justice is dead, Harold. The world runs on contracts and numbers now. You're just an old man clinging to memory. I met his gaze. In court, the men who say that never win. Enough, Victoria snapped. Don't turn dinner into a lecture. Just sign the papers. Transfer the trust. You lose nothing, just peace. I looked around. Reflections of my face splintered across silver and glass. A father, a judge, a man on trial in his own home. I spoke slowly. Peace doesn't come from a signature. It comes from the dignity of not selling your soul for yield. Silence fell. Rain began tapping against the glass roof. Evan leaned forward, smirking. You'll regret going against your family. I rose, reaching for my coat. Family used to mean something else. Tonight's definition I don't recognize. Where are you going? Victoria shouted. To the only place justice still lives, Rockport. I pressed the button on my phone. Recording saved. The door closed behind me. Somewhere inside I heard glass shatter. Maybe a wine glass thrown. Maybe something deeper breaking. I didn't look back. The moment they turned justice into currency, they sentenced themselves. Driving away, the city shimmered under the rain, each streetlight stretching into gold streaks on the windshield. My reflection stared back, older, sadder, but unbroken. I had lost much. Family, trust, respect. But I still had one thing left, silence with evidence. I left Beacon Hill in the rain, and that night the sound of it became the rhythm of what I was about to do. By the time my car reached Rockport, dawn had broken over the sea. For the first time in months, I saw my direction clearly. Silence, but with intent. I sat at my desk, pulled out the worn leather notebook, and on the first page saw Marilyn's old handwriting. If no one listens, let truth speak for you. I switched on the lamp and wrote, Phase 1, Cognitive Validation. Phase 2, Chain of Expert Witnesses. Phase 3, Anonymous Motion. The next morning I called Margaret Foley. Her voice was steady, slightly breathless from chasing too many leads. I take it you're not planning to let them win easily, she said. I'm not trying to reclaim family, I answered. I just don't want justice to be rewritten by blood. You'll need evidence of competency, she said quickly. The court won't hear emotion, only documentation. Then I'll find it, I replied. 4 days later, I began reaching out to those who once stood beside me, not for affection, but for truth. I typed and mailed 12 letters on old letterhead that read, To my colleagues, I, Harold Grayson, former judge of Suffolk County, affirm that I am of sound mind and fully aware of my legal rights. I ask you to confirm this in writing, if you still believe in the weight of a signature. Sincerely, H. Grayson. The list included Judge Preston Ellis, retired once the clerk I saved from ruin, Judge Miriam O'Neill, my old peer on the ethics bench, Dr. Richard Lowell, the forensic psychiatrist who evaluated hundreds for competency, and 9 others, gray-haired judges who once drank coffee with me between hearings. I didn't beg. I only asked them to write the truth, even if it didn't favor me. 3 days later, the first envelopes returned. Judge Ellis's handwriting read, I have witnessed Judge Grayson through hundreds of trials. His reason has always outweighed emotion. Even in this letter, I recognize his sharp mind and memory intact. Dr. Lowell included a full report titled Comprehensive Neurocognitive Evaluation. Patient, Harold Grayson, age 71. Result, no cognitive impairment, full executive functioning. In blue ink, he added, I will testify if needed. I read each line slowly, hearing my own voice returning through theirs. Each page was a heartbeat, proof that I still existed, not just as a father, but as a man capable of defending himself. Margaret arrived in Rockport that Friday afternoon with a stack of papers, affidavits, and a sealed envelope marked Motion for Protective Filing. I filed it with Suffolk County Court, she said, Respondent H. Grayson, sealed record. It means your identity stays confidential throughout proceedings. You remain respondent, but with lawful silence. I looked at the document. Top corner, filed under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 190B, Guardians and Conservators. So they won't know when I appear? Exactly. We let them file, thinking you're defenseless. Then at the hearing we arrive, with witnesses, medical reports, everything. The effect will be reversal. You have a name for this plan? I asked. She smiled. You once said silence is the weapon of those who understand law. Let's call it the plan of silence. That night I sat alone in my wooden study. The desk lamp glowed over the notebook. Outside, the waves struck the rocks in a steady heartbeat. I turned to a new page and wrote slowly, pressing hard. Silence is the first appeal. Tomorrow, justice will live, not in words, but in preparation. I closed the notebook. The calm that filled me wasn't surrender. It was the quiet of readiness. Every sound, the sea, the wind, the echo of last night's rain, merged into a single rhythm, the pulse of return. At sunrise, I brewed coffee and opened the window. The sky over Rockport was clear, glass blue. The lighthouse blinked. Light, dark, light, just like the plan. Hidden, revealed, timed. I typed a message to Margaret. Phase 1 complete. Let them speak first. Her reply came almost instantly. Understood. Silence begins. That morning, Boston looked freshly washed after the rain. Sunlight shimmered on the marble steps of Suffolk County Courthouse, where hundreds of footsteps, many of them mine, had once echoed over 35 years. But today I didn't walk in wearing a judge's robe. I came in a moss-green sweater, sea-stained Rockport shoes, and a worn leather briefcase. Inside it were 12 letters, one medical report, and a silence carefully designed. In the main hall, I heard the rhythm of Victoria's heels. She walked beside Evan, confident, in a beige blazer, her face carefully made up, as if heading to a business meeting, not a hearing to declare her father legally incompetent. They didn't see me sitting in the shadowed back row of the lobby. I heard Evan whisper, "It's all set, Vic. Once you sign the guardianship order, the account transfers to your name." Victoria nodded, smiling faintly. "He won't fight it. He's more afraid of the court than of dying." I lowered my head, smiling to myself. She had forgotten. I used to command this very room, handing down verdicts that made men like Evan beg for mercy. And today they would learn justice doesn't fear the court. Margaret approached, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Ready?" "I've been ready since the day they called me senile." We entered courtroom 3B. The walls were still walnut, sunlight pouring through the tall windows, and above the judge's bench gleamed the old bronze plaque, "In justice we remember who we are." I had sat beneath that plaque for 3 decades, and now I returned as a defendant, or rather as a witness to myself. Victoria and Evan sat at the petitioner's table, with a young attorney, slick, polished, whispering instructions. Victoria nodded, then glanced at me and smiled, a small, practiced curve of the lips. At the bench, Preston Ellis, his hair now silver, posture dignified, entered. I saw him before he saw me. The clerk's voice rang out. "Case number 22-1157. Petition for guardianship and declaration of mental incapacity. Petitioner, Mrs. Victoria Hale. Respondent, Mr. H. Grayson." Preston adjusted his glasses, voice formal and steady. "Petitioner present, respondent present. So noted." He began reading the petition, tone cold, procedural. Petitioner alleges that the respondent, Harold Grayson, age 71, exhibits signs of diminished capacity to manage inherited estate, valued at approximately $1.2 million, consisting of a Cambridge townhouse and diversified trust assets. The petitioner seeks appointment as legal guardian and property administrator. The sound of pages turning, then a pause. Preston frowned, rereading the first page. "Harold Grayson?" His voice slowed, then stopped. His hand froze midair. The pen slipped from his fingers, rolling once across the wooden desk. The room fell silent. 1 second. 2. Then he looked up. His eyes swept the room until they found me. Color drained from his face like paint washed from a canvas. His mouth trembled. "My God! Judge Harold Grayson?" The courtroom froze. Clerks turned. A bailiff hesitated. Victoria smiled faintly, thinking he'd misspoken. But then Preston rose from the bench, voice shaking, yet clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, the respondent in today's case is none other than Judge Harold Grayson, the man who presided in this very court for over 30 years. Victoria wasn't shocked by the fact, I was her father after all, but by the reaction around her, the way Preston stood, the clerks stopped writing, the way everyone looked at me with reverence. For the first time, she realized they weren't judging an old senile man. They were facing a symbol of justice she had just tried to disgrace. Evan reached for her shoulder, but his hand trembled. Everything they'd prepared for months evaporated in that instant. Preston turned to me, his voice unsteady between respect and emotion. You still remember me, sir?" I stood, spine straight, voice calm but clear. "I do, and I remember the young clerk who once wept in my office 30 years ago when I told him justice is not a transaction." Preston nodded slowly, then looked around the courtroom. "Let the record reflect. The respondent is former Judge Harold Grayson of this court. From this moment forward, proceedings will continue with the utmost respect for a man who has served justice. Silence filled the room. Sunlight glinted off the wooden bench where the old gavel rested, a relic of truth. Margaret leaned close and whispered, "Your silence just exploded." I didn't answer. I only looked at my daughter, her eyes no longer confident, but fearful and newly aware. Justice doesn't need to be declared. It only needs to be seen. Preston struck the gavel, voice resonant. Court resumes. Let the record show. The respondent is Judge Harold Grayson. That single line rippled through the room. No music, no argument, just a name. And with it, Victoria's world collapsed. I smiled faintly. At last, silence had spoken. The courtroom stayed silent, as if sound itself had vanished. No pens tapped, no papers rustled. Preston sat upright at the bench, hands clasped tight, his face lit by a slant of sunlight through the tall oak window. I looked at him and saw not only respect in his eyes, but memory, the kind born from standing once where I stood, trembling before the line between right and wrong. Slowly I rose, adjusted the collar of my moss-green sweater, and turned toward him. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "if I may, I'd like to speak, not in defense, but as a reminder of what this room once meant." Preston gave a small nod. "You may, Judge Grayson." I stepped forward, resting one hand on the rail. 35 years ago," I began, "I sat in that same chair where you sit today. A young clerk once forged a payment record, just a few $1,000s from a law firm. I didn't fire him. I only asked, 'Do you think easy money is ever clean?' And then I told him, 'Easy money has a price.'" I paused, meeting Preston's gaze. He lowered his eyes and nodded slightly. "That clerk was Preston Ellis, the same man this court now calls judge. And the price of easy money wasn't suspension or shame. It was the scar of conscience that kept him awake for years, until he learned to do what was right. He learned. And today he sits where I once sat, doing what's right, keeping justice intact." The courtroom was still. I saw a few spectators bow their heads. Margaret sat behind me, eyes bright, clutching the USB in her hand. Evan stared down at the table, tapping his finger nervously. Victoria remained frozen, wide-eyed, unsure whether to feel shame or fear. Continued, voice steady, each word like a hammer strike. "I'm not here to win nor to prove my sanity. I'm here to remind those who've forgotten that justice isn't a tool of power or wealth. I don't oppose the law. I oppose the way they've twisted it." The words fell heavy like marble slabs. Preston placed a hand over his chest, his eyes wet. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it. "You're still the same, Judge," he said quietly. I smiled faintly, not proud, just calm. "No, Preston, I've simply kept the promise we made when we first wore the robe. No one stands above the law, not even those who write it." A young clerk at the back dropped her pen and looked up. She had never seen a defendant teach a courtroom what justice meant. Sunlight poured through the window, striking the bench where I stood, illuminating every old grain of wood, the same wood I'd touched while signing thousands of verdicts. I turned to my daughter. "My dear," I said slowly, "I'm not angry you wanted control of the estate. You have the right to ambition. But you were wrong to think honor could be collateral. You can sell a house you built. You can resign from a career. But you cannot mortgage trust. Because once you do, you lose what no court can restore." Victoria's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Evan's hand on her shoulder froze under Preston's watchful eyes. I exhaled deeply and bowed my head. "I'm finished, Your Honor. I just wanted my last words not to be a plea, but a reminder. Justice isn't the sound of a gavel. It's how a person uses silence to stay true." Preston rose, tapped the gavel once, but didn't say court in order. His voice shook. "I heard you say those words 35 years ago, and I still believe them today. Easy money has a price. Justice may be slow, but it forgets no one." A soft applause rose from the back rows. not loud, but reverent. Preston didn't stop it. He let it drift through the room like wind through memory. I sat down, hands resting loosely on my knees, heartbeat steady. No victory, no ruling needed. The moment Preston spoke, the trial was over. Not by procedure, but by principle. Margaret leaned closer, whispering, "That's a lecture no law school could ever teach." I smiled, eyes lifted to the wooden plaque above. "Injustice. We remember who we are." And I knew I had just reminded them. Silence, when deep enough, can make even the law bow its head. The air in the courtroom was so thick that the faintest sound of paper turning echoed sharply. After I sat down, Preston remained standing, hands clasped before him. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to either end or begin. Margaret stepped forward, gray coat, calm face, eyes gleaming like a blade. She requested permission to present new evidence. Preston nodded. "Granted." She placed a small silver USB on the table. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "this is a legally obtained recording under the one-party consent law of Massachusetts. It contains an exchange in which the petitioner, Mrs. Victoria Hale, offered a court staff member $75,000 in cash to falsify a medical statement regarding the respondent's cognitive capacity." A sharp gasp rippled through the gallery. Victoria shot up, face pale. "No, I didn't." But Margaret had already connected the USB to the display. The recording played, cold and crisp, through the courtroom speakers. "You just need to confirm my father forgets dates. I'll pay 75 grand, cash. No trail. I just want this done fast." Victoria's voice, distinct, firm, unmistakable, cut through the air like a blade turned back on its wielder. Evan broke into sweat, eyes darting for an escape. But Margaret wasn't finished. She opened a black folder. "And here, Your Honor, is a notarized statement from Eastbrook Bank confirming a cash withdrawal of exactly $75,000 from Mr. Evan Hale's account that same morning. Furthermore, attached is a 2015 report from the Rhode Island District Attorney's Office referencing a prior financial misconduct investigation involving Mr. Hale." She placed each document on the table, each sheet falling like a nail sealing their fate. Preston examined them, his expression shifting, from weary to resolute. He tapped the gavel once. "Court in order." Silence. He looked first at Victoria, then at Evan. "Would either of you like to respond?" Evan forced a twisted smile. This must be a misunderstanding." "No," Preston interrupted. "I've heard the recording. There is no misunderstanding. This is an attempt to bribe a witness and falsify court evidence. That is not only unethical, it is criminal under Massachusetts law." Victoria collapsed into her chair, hands covering her face. Evan reached toward her, but she shoved his hand away, tears streaking down. "You ruined me," she sobbed. Margaret stepped forward, handing the complete file to the bailiff. Preston reviewed the pages one last time, then spoke, voice steady and resonant as a bell. "Based on the evidence presented before this court, the petition to declare Mr. Harold Grayson legally incapacitated is hereby dismissed in full. Furthermore, this court orders that all materials be referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation into the acts of witness, tampering, and bribery by Mr. Evan Hale and Mrs. Victoria Hale." The sound of his words sliced through the air like steel. Reporters from the local Boston Herald News, permitted to record under open court policy, filmed as Preston held the documents high. Sunlight from the window outlined his profile and the papers in a radiant glow. His voice rose, deep and unwavering. "This is proof that justice still lives, and as long as we dare to speak the truth, it will never die." The courtrooms erupted in applause, not for victory, but for the rare sight of honor and law standing on the same side. Preston turned toward me, bowing deeply, a gesture of respect from a former student to his teacher. Do you wish to make a final statement, Judge Grayson? I stood, light falling across half my face. No, Your Honor. Only my thanks. Not for the ruling, but for proving that the law still shelters those who remain honest. I bowed slightly and looked to Margaret. She nodded back, lips curved in the faint, knowing smile of a strategist whose work was complete. Victoria buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. The bailiff approached Evan as Preston said curtly, "Custody pending inquiry." 2 officers moved in, escorting him away. I watched, not with triumph, but with quiet sorrow. Justice doesn't need cheers. It only needs to be seen, alive, and recorded. Outside the window, the flag of Massachusetts rippled in the noon light, shimmering like a silent testament. Preston struck the gavel one last time. Court adjourned. The sound echoed, not like an ending, but like the heartbeat of faith reborn. I looked around the room. Every gaze met mine, not as a defendant, but as a reminder of what they thought was lost. I smiled softly and said to Margaret, "Justice doesn't need noise. It only needs timing." That night, rain returned to Rockport, the heavy kind slanting through the roof tiles, as if the sea itself wanted to embrace the shore one last time. I came home around 9 o'clock. Streetlights glowed against the wooden walls, revealing chipped paint and weathered streaks, what Marilyn once called the most beautiful wrinkles of a house. I opened the door without turning on the ceiling light. The room still smelled of pine and salt, just like 10 years ago. I lit a single oil lamp and set it on the table. The soft gold glow fell across Marilyn's photograph. Her smile was as gentle as the day she saw me off to my first trial. I sat in the rocking chair, my shoes still caked with Boston mud. Outside, the waves rolled steadily, the wind slipping through the cracks. For the first time in months, the house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. The phone on the table vibrated, a message from Margaret. The DA has officially opened a criminal investigation against Evan Hale for witness bribery and financial fraud. Victoria took a plea deal, claimed undue influence from her husband to lessen her sentence. I read the line again and again, feeling neither victory nor relief, only emptiness. The judge and me understood. The law had done its job. But the father in me knew no verdict could ever be fair enough. I opened my old notebook, the one where I'd once written, "Silence is the first appeal." Beneath it I added a new line, "And tears are the final verdict." My hand trembled slightly. I looked out the window. The sea was dark, the only light coming from the distant lighthouse. One flash, one pause, one flash again, like a heartbeat still holding on. I remembered the last time I taught Victoria to drive. She was 17. On this same coastal road, I told her, "If you grip the wheel too tight, you'll drift off course. Loosen your hands. Let the road guide you." She laughed, hair flying, and said, "I'm afraid to let go, Dad." So was I. Afraid to let go. Afraid to lose. Afraid that if I didn't hold everything together, our family would shatter. But tonight, when I learned she'd signed the plea deal, I understood. Some things must be carried away by the wind, because the harder you hold, the more they tear. I stood and poured a bit of whiskey into a small glass. The embers shimmered beneath the lamp. I lifted it toward Marilyn's photo. "We won, my love," I whispered. "But sometimes the price of victory is the loneliness only justice can understand." The drink burned my throat. Outside, the wind howled louder. Rain struck the windows in a rhythm like the gavel from this morning's hearing. I saw Victoria's face in my mind, blurred with tears, hands trembling as she signed. I felt no anger, only sorrow. She had chosen the wrong man, believed the wrong things, but I too had once been blind, thinking morality could be taught through words alone. I was wrong. Virtue is taught through scars. The oil lamp flickered, my shadow stretching across the wall, touching Marilyn's frame. I smiled faintly, weary. "If you were still here," I murmured, "you'd have told me to stop earlier." But maybe you'd also understand. I had to let them learn their own lesson. The rain softened. I heard the waves again, gentle, mournful. I stepped onto the porch and looked at the sea. Raindrops fell on the wooden railing, dissolving like salt. Overhead, the sky was heavy and black, but the lighthouse swept across it once more. Slow, steady, proud, just like justice. It never disappears, only arrives later than we hope. I sighed and whispered to myself, I have nothing left to prove. Peace is enough. Inside the old house, only the ticking clock marked time. On the desk, the files were sealed. The USB delivered to the DA. The case now in criminal court. Everything was finished. Yet amid the stillness, my heart felt strangely hollow. Justice had lived again, but fatherhood had died a little. I sat down and wrote the last line in my journal. Justice wins, love loses. But perhaps losing is sometimes the only way to keep what's right intact. I set the pen down and extinguished the lamp. Darkness filled the room, and a flash from the distant sea lit Marilyn's frame one last time before fading. I whispered, Rest now, Justice. Rest now, my daughter. And I stayed there, listening to the waves, until the first dawn of winter stretched across the sea and pulled me out of my own storm. Morning came, and Rockport felt scrubbed clean of the night's heaviness. A thin mist floated over the sea, carrying salt and the smell of coffee from the kitchen. I sat at the wooden table, before me a stack of sealed files, and a pale yellow envelope I hadn't opened in 3 months. The words scrawled across it read, To Harold, from Charles. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was the letter from Charles, my late friend, and Marilyn's brother, the man Victoria always thought had left only money. But to me, he had always left something far greater. I opened it. The paper smelled faintly of pine and thyme. His handwriting, bold even, unbroken, still carried his voice. Harold, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know you'll care for Victoria, but I also know one day your sense of justice will be tested. I didn't leave you money to spend. I left you responsibility, to use it for those treated unfairly, those without a voice. Don't keep it for family. Give it to a larger one. My vision blurred. Outside, the first light of morning glinted off the silver face of the water. I folded the letter, laid my hand on it, and could almost hear Charles again. Justice should never end inside a courtroom. That afternoon, I called Margaret and Preston. We met at a small cafe on Main Street, its windows overlooking the harbor. Preston looked calm, the kind of calm that follows a career-defining day. Margaret carried a folder thick with papers. I said, I've decided. Charles's inheritance won't rest in a bank. It will work. Preston set down his cup. What do you plan to do with it? I smiled. I'll start a fund. A place that offers legal aid to those who can't afford counsel, to cases left behind because no one stood up for them. I'll call it the Charles Grayson Legal Aid Center. Margaret nodded, lips curving faintly. A 501c3 nonprofit. I can file the paperwork this week. Preston can help with professional ethics certification and advisory work. Preston chuckled softly. After all these years, we're working together again, but this time on the right side of the gavel. We exchanged a look that needed no words. 3 people who had stood on different sides of justice, a judge, a lawyer, and one once wrongly accused, now sat together to rebuild what society had forgotten. 2 weeks later, the Charles Grayson Legal Aid Center received its 5-3 status. Its home was a small red brick building in Rockport, once an old library. On a bronze plaque by the door were the words, For Those Without Voice, established 2025. Margaret became executive director, Preston honorary counsel, and I, Harold Grayson, asked only to be called founder. On opening day, a soft drizzle fell. I stepped onto the small wooden stage, facing a few dozen people, each with their own reason to believe in justice. I spoke simply. I didn't build this place for redemption, but for continuity. I've seen justice twisted, bought, bent, but I've also seen it healed, not by money, but by action. I looked at Margaret and Preston. When people stop trusting the courts, give them a place where they can trust the heart of the law. Applause rose, not loud, but long-lasting. I glanced up at Charles's photograph hanging on the wall. Framed in oak, I'd carved myself. His kind smile looked down, approving. Days later, the Boston Globe ran the headline across its front page. From scandal to sanctuary of justice, former judge turns betrayal into hope. The article began. After a family trial that captured statewide attention, former Judge Harold Grayson has dedicated his inheritance to establish a legal fund for the underrepresented. With Judge Preston Ellis and attorney Margaret Foley by his side, the center promises to become a refuge for those who have nowhere else to turn for justice. I clipped the article and pressed it between 2 pages of my notebook, beside my old line. Silence is the first appeal. Beneath it, I wrote a new one. And action is the final appeal. That evening, the Rockport sky glowed gold with sunset. The wind carried the scent of the sea through the new brass plaques outside the center. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The weight in my chest was lighter now. I knew I couldn't repair the past, but at least I'd used it to build a future for others. The waves lapped gently at the pier as if in agreement. I smiled and murmured, "Thank you, Charles. Thank you for leaving, not money, but purpose." In the distance, the Rockport lighthouse flashed once, then twice, a farewell from the departed. And I knew then, tonight, justice lived not only in courtrooms, but in every brick I had just laid for the living. 6 months later, Rockport settled into early summer. The sea was calm, seagulls flew low, and the scent of fresh paint from the Charles Grayson Legal Aid Center drifted across town. The center had begun taking its first cases. A worker cheated of wages, an elderly widow defrauded of her home, a veteran denied his insurance claim. Every morning I still came to the office, reviewed files with Margaret, signed a few papers, then stepped onto the porch to watch the sea. The small office felt warm, with Charles's photo hanging beside my old quote, "Silence is the first appeal. Action is the final appeal." That day, Margaret entered holding a new file. "Someone just applied as a volunteer," she said softly. I glanced at the first page, Victoria Hale. My chest tightened. What does she want to do? Community outreach volunteer. Unpaid. She paused, her eyes searching mine. "Do you want to see her?" I stayed quiet for a long moment. The wind from the sea blew through the window, carrying the taste of salt. Finally, I said, "If she's coming for justice, this place will welcome her like anyone else." The next afternoon, Victoria arrived. She was thinner, her face bare, her hair tied back neatly. The plain white blouse made her look different, not the plaintiff she once was, but someone trying to find her way back. She stood before my desk, speechless. I saw no pride in her eyes now, only exhaustion and sincerity. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. "I've divorced Evan. He's being prosecuted, and I signed the plea deal. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to do something good, if you'll let me." I looked at her for a long while. Outside, the evening light shimmered across the sea, each wave brushing softly against the rocks. I said simply, "This center isn't mine. It belongs to those learning to stand again. If you truly mean it, stay." She bowed her head, tears falling on the wooden desk. No more words followed, only the steady ticking of the wall clock, calm as breathing. A week later, I saw her in the hallway. She was helping a young woman fill out a legal aid form, her tone gentle, careful. Each time she greeted someone, she used both hands, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. From across the hall, Margaret smiled at me. "She works as if she's atoning with every word," she murmured. I only nodded. That evening, after work, Victoria came to my porch. The sun dipped behind the rocks, and the sky washed in pale orange. I sat on my old wooden chair, sipping tea, listening to the waves. She joined me, silent for a long time. The waves and distant cries of gulls filled the air. "Dad," she said softly, voice trembling like it might break the air, "I want to learn how to be a person again?" I looked out at the sea and answered slowly, "Then start by helping someone else." She turned toward me, eyes glistening, and nodded. We sat together for a long time, saying nothing. The breeze carried salt and lavender from the garden, the two scents weaving together. In that moment, the 10 years between us seemed to shrink to a single breath. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a bronze name tag, Victoria Hale, Volunteer Counselor, Charles Grayson Legal Aid Center. My fingers trembled as I touched it, not from age, but from something breaking and being mended at once. We stayed there until night fell. The lighthouse swept a beam across the water. Victoria rested her head on my shoulder. "I don't know if I can fix everything," she whispered. I cut in gently. "You don't need to. Just don't repeat it." The sound of the waves blended with the beat of my heart. I knew I had forgiven her, not in words, but in silence. Inside the house, the old clock struck 8. Through the window, I saw the lights of the Grayson Center still glowing, people working late, soft laughter echoing. Justice was still alive, and this time it no longer belonged to me alone. I spoke softly, as if to the sea. Justice doesn't end with a verdict. It continues in how we forgive. Victoria took my hand, her grip warm, fragile, real. The wind brushed past us, carrying the smell of salt and the calm rhythm of the tide. On the old wooden porch in the quiet of Rockport, we sat there, two people who had lost each other, now finding the quiet that no longer hurt. I still live in Rockport. Each morning I brew a cup of black coffee and open the window to the sound of waves. On the table lies my old notebook, every page filled. The last line, written with a shakier hand but a steadier heart, reads, "Justice doesn't live in the courtroom. It lives in how we treat others once we leave it." The Charles Grayson Legal Aid Center still glows each night. I sometimes see Victoria at the reception desk, speaking with a single mother filing a complaint, and I understand that true victory isn't a verdict. It's when another generation chooses to stand for what's right. Preston stops by sometimes, sitting on the porch, telling stories of law students inspired by my case. Margaret still sends her reports, always ending with the line, "Justice lives quietly, but it lives." As for me, Harold Grayson, I'm no longer a judge, a defendant, an angry father. I'm just an old man by the sea, who believes some battles can only be won through silence, and some wounds only heal through forgiveness. If you've listened this far, if you've ever been belittled, misunderstood, or had to fight to protect your dignity, share this story. Comment on the city where you're listening from, because justice has no borders. It deserves to be told in every street and every home. And if you believe silence is not weakness, but the beginning of strength, leave a single dot below, just one. So I'll know that somewhere out there are still people who believe dignity never goes out of style, and that justice, though slow, always finds its way home.